When I walked up the driveway that morning, I thought someone had broken into the wrong house. There were clothes scattered across the lawn like a garage sale gone wrong. My old church dresses. The quilt my husband and I made the year he passed. Even my wedding dress, still wrapped in plastic. All of it dumped on the grass, wilting under the Oregon sun. For a second, I couldn't move. My grocery bag slipped from my hand, and a dozen apples rolled across the sidewalk. That's when I heard her voice. Bright and sugary. The kind that makes your teeth ache. Sabrina. My daughter-in-law. She was standing on the porch with her phone pointed at herself, all dolled up in a pink romper, talking to her online followers. Her voice carried across the street. Decluttering day. Out with the old, in with the new. These old clothes take up so much space. She smiled into the camera as if she was saving the world from mothballs. My heart pounded in my ears. I had been careful with those clothes, washed and folded for years, every piece holding a story. I took a breath, walked closer, and said calmly, "So does your attitude, dear." Her smile froze, and the live stream went silent. She lowered the phone just a little, eyes darting between me and the camera. "Oh. Hi. Mom. You're back early. I was just cleaning up for you. You know, trying to make the house a little more modern." I picked up one of my dresses from the lawn. The blue one I wore to my husband's funeral. The hem was dragging in the dirt. "You don't clean by throwing people's memories outside," I said. Sabrina gave a light laugh, the kind she uses when she feels cornered. "Come on. It's just stuff. Nobody needs all this clutter. I'm helping you." "Mom?" Helping, I turned to face her. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled slightly. "If you really want to help, start by folding everything you threw out." For the first time, she looked unsure. The phone in her hand wobbled. "What? That's ridiculous. I'm in the middle of." "Then finish what you started." I bent down and began picking up each piece, shaking off the grass. My back ached, but my pride kept me straight. Across the street, Mrs. Flores, my neighbor, had stopped watering her petunias. She stared, phone in hand, whispering to herself. Later I'd learned she had filmed the whole thing. Sabrina sighed loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. "Fine. If it'll make you feel better." She crouched, still holding her phone, now pointed at the ground. Her movements were jerky, frustrated. "Be careful with that quilt," I said softly. "My husband and I sewed it during the winter of '98. Took us 3 months. Sabrina muttered something under her breath. I didn't ask what. A car drove by slowly, the driver gawking. My cheeks burned, but I refused to let tears come. I folded my husband's old flannel shirt, laid it neatly on the pile, and said quietly, "A home isn't measured by how new it looks, Sabrina. It's measured by how much heart it holds." She didn't answer. The only sound was the rustle of fabric and the faint chirping of her phone notifications. When we were done, the yard looked like a thrift store display. Sabrina stood up, brushed her knees, and said in that sharp tone of hers, "There. Happy I was just trying to make some space. It's not that deep." I met her eyes. "It's deep to me. One day, when something you love gets tossed aside, maybe you'll understand." She rolled her eyes, turned off the camera, and stormed inside. I stayed there for a moment, breathing in the smell of cut grass and old fabric. The sky was too bright, the kind of brightness that makes everything look harsh and unkind. I picked up my grocery bag, now bruised apples and all, and followed her inside. Liam was in the kitchen, still in his work boots, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, confused. "Mom, what's going on out there? Ask your wife," I said, setting the groceries on the counter. My voice came out softer than I expected. Sabrina appeared behind me, acting as if nothing happened. Just decluttering. Babe, you said we needed more space for the baby room. Remember, he frowned. I said maybe later. When Mom's ready. Well, she's never ready. Sabrina shot back. She keeps everything. Half this house is full of junk. Liam looked at me. Torn. Mom, it's fine, I said, forcing a small smile. If my things are such a burden, I'll make room myself. I started gathering my clothes from the pile on the floor, folding each piece carefully. The silence between us was thick. Sabrina crossed her arms. Liam rubbed the back of his neck. Caught in the middle. I turned to my son. Liam, I worked 40 years to afford this home. Every stitch, every piece of fabric out there has a story. Don't let her tell you those stories don't matter. He opened his mouth but said nothing. That night, I sat in my room, surrounded by the folded clothes I had rescued. The house felt smaller, colder. I ran my hand over my wedding dress, yellowed but still soft, and whispered, I guess memories do take up space, just not the kind she understands. Outside, I could hear Sabrina's laugh from the living room. That high, polished laugh she used online. Liam's voice was lower, tired, trying to keep up. I turned off the lamp and lay back, staring at the ceiling. I thought about my husband. How he used to say, people show their true colors when they think no one's watching. Well, everyone had been watching today. I didn't know yet that Mrs. Nday Flores had posted the video on her neighborhood page, or that people all over Portland would soon be talking about the sassy grandma who stood her ground. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I hadn't backed down. But as I closed my eyes, one thought lingered. This wasn't the end of it. Sabrina's pride wouldn't let it be. And deep down, I could feel it. Quiet but certain. The storm had just begun. The next few days felt like walking on eggshells. Sabrina didn't speak to me unless she had to. And when she did, her voice carried that polite tone people use when they're trying not to explode. Liam went quiet too. He came home late from work, ate standing up at the counter, and fell asleep on the couch more often than not. The house had gone from awkward to unbearable. One afternoon she showed up at my door, holding a cup of tea, smiling like we were best friends. The smell hit me before the cup did. Too sweet. Too strong. Chamomile, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Good for stress. Thank you, I said carefully, setting it on the dresser. She looked around my room. You have a lot of stuff again. I thought we cleaned all this out. My fingers clenched. These are things I chose to keep. She shrugged, walking over to the closet. We just need to make sure there's room when we start the renovation. You know, for the studio space. Lighting. Backdrops. All that. I stared at her back. Perfectly straight. Perfectly controlled. You mean my room? Sabrina turned, flashing that influencer smile. Just temporarily. You'll have a cozy little place downstairs. We'll fix it up nice. Promise. I didn't answer. I knew a decision had already been made. And it wasn't mine. That night, I heard them arguing behind their bedroom door. Her voice sharp, his voice low. I didn't want to listen. But the walls in this house had never kept secrets. She embarrassed me in front of everyone. Sabrina hissed. I told you not to throw her stuff out. Liam said tiredly. She's ruining my brand. Liam. People think I'm cruel. You are cruel. A slap of silence followed. Then her voice. Shaky but cold. You don't mean that. He didn't answer. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. A mix of anger and sadness twisting in my chest. The next morning, she came down wearing her best fake smile. Morning. Mom. I'm making pancakes. Want some? No. Thank you, I said. I'm heading to church. At the women's group. My friend Helen Brooks took one look at me and said, You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, I admitted. She's trying to erase me from my own house. Helen poured coffee and slid it my way. Some people confuse control with order. Don't let her rewrite your story. I gave a tired laugh. It's hard to fight someone who smiles while she's stabbing you. Then don't fight, Helen said softly. Document. Always keep proof. Her words stuck with me. That afternoon, while cleaning up, I noticed my husband's leather jacket missing. I searched everywhere. Then the old quilt, the one we'd sewn together, was gone too. My chest tightened. I walked to the garage and saw empty space where my vintage trunk had been. Sabrina was in the kitchen. Phone propped up, recording some video about budget lifestyle hacks. I waited until she turned off the camera. Did you move my trunk? She didn't look up. What trunk? The wooden one. My husband's jacket was in there. Oh. That old thing, I thought it was for donation. I took it to the vintage shop on Main Street. They'll resell it. You sold it, my voice cracked. It's better than letting it rot. Mom, you should be thanking me. I felt dizzy, gripping the counter. You had no right. She smirked. Relax. You can buy something new with the space you have now. I turned and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. That evening, I called Henry Green, my late husband's old friend and attorney. His voice was calm as always. Evelyn. Do you still have the deed to your house? In my safe, I said. Why, just a precaution. Bring it by tomorrow. I'll take a look. I barely slept that night. The next day, Henry studied the papers carefully. This property, he said finally, is still in your name. You never transferred ownership. Correct, no. I just let Liam and Sabrina move in after they got married. I thought it was family. He leaned back. Then legally. You're the sole owner. They're tenants at will. Nothing more. I nodded slowly. A cold calm settling over me. Thank you. Henry. Evelyn. He added gently. Don't confront them yet. Just be smart. I promised I would. When I came home, Sabrina was rearranging furniture in the living room. Humming. Liam was helping her. Though his face looked tired, she glanced up. All sweetness again. Perfect timing. Mom, we decided to set up my filming corner here. Isn't it great? I looked at the half-empty bookshelf. The box is labeled storage. Where did my books go? Oh. Those old things, don't worry. They're in the basement. Speaking of, we cleaned up down there for you. It's your new room. Cozy. Right, Liam shifted uncomfortably. It's just temporary. Mom. Until the nursery's ready. I met his eyes. You think that's fair? He looked away. It's only for a while. Sabrina smiled wide. See, everyone's happy. I said nothing. I walked downstairs. The room smelled like paint and damp cement. There was a small cot in the corner. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. My dresses were folded neatly on plastic shelves. For a moment, I stood there frozen. Then I took out my phone and pressed record. Her voice still echoed in my head. Cozy. Right? I filmed the room from corner to corner. The bare bulb. The concrete floor. The mold stains on the wall. Then I turned the camera to myself. My face looked pale, but my voice was steady. This is what happens when you let someone else decide your worth. That night, I moved my belongings quietly. Every step echoed in the hallway. Upstairs. Sabrina laughed at something on TV. Liam said nothing. I sat on the cot, hands clasped. The sound of the washing machine rumbling above me. My chest ached. But my mind was clear. Helen's words rang again. Document. Keep proof. The next morning, I saw Mrs. Flores walking her dog. She waved. Evelyn, you're famous. Did you know that video of you went viral? People love you. What video? I asked. She held up her phone, showing me the clip she'd filmed of me telling Sabrina to fold the clothes. The comments were flooded with hearts and fire emojis. Everyone's calling you the fold your attitude grandma. You're a hit. I smiled weakly. Well, that's something. As I walked back toward the house, I caught a glimpse of Sabrina through the window, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was red, her voice sharp. Liam sat on the couch, rubbing his temples. She looked up and saw me outside. Her eyes narrowed into a glare that sent a chill down my spine. I realized then that she wasn't finished. The internet might have laughed for a day, but Sabrina's pride would make her strike harder next time. I closed the door behind me, the air heavy and still, and whispered to myself, "Let her come. I'm ready this time." It started with a knock on the door just after sunset. The sound was sharp, official. I looked up from my cup of tea, and my stomach tightened. Sabrina's voice floated from upstairs, sharp and high. She was talking to someone, her words too quick to understand. When I opened the door, a police officer stood on the porch, hat tucked under one arm, a notebook in his hand. His name tag read Miller. Behind him, the lights from his car painted the driveway red and blue. Even before he spoke, I knew who had called. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "We got a report about a disturbance here. A woman named Sabrina Harper." I nodded. "Of course. Come in." Sabrina rushed down the stairs as if she'd been waiting for her cue. Her face was pale, her voice trembling with fake innocence. "Officer, thank you for coming. She's been yelling and threatening me all day. I don't feel safe with her in the house." I stared at her, stunned by how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her all day. Liam came down after her, looking lost. Officer Miller turned to me. "Ma'am, could I get your full name?" "Please." "Evelyn Harper," I said. He blinked, writing it down. "So, you're Mrs. Harper, too?" Sabrina jumped in, shaking her head. "No. No. I'm the homeowner. She's just staying here." Something in me finally snapped, but not in the way she expected. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I walked over to my desk, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it to the officer. Inside were copies of the deed, the tax records, and a printout of an email from Henry Green verifying everything. Officer Miller flipped through the papers slowly. Then he looked at Sabrina. "Ma'am, it looks like this property is owned by Mrs. Hevant, Evelyn Harper. Legally, she's the homeowner." For a moment, the room went silent. Then Sabrina's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "That can't be right. My husband lives here. It's our house." Liam finally spoke, voice small. "Sabrina, she never signed it over." "You knew," Sabrina hissed. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." He rubbed his forehead. "I told you it was still in her name. You didn't listen." Officer Miller closed the folder. "I'm going to ask everyone to calm down." He looked at Sabrina. "Since there's a legal dispute over property, I'm going to advise you and your husband to stay somewhere else until this is resolved." Sabrina's jaw dropped. "You're kicking us out." He didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to leave peacefully." Liam looked defeated. He nodded slowly. "Fine. We'll go." But Sabrina wasn't finished. She pointed at me, her voice shaking. "You did this on purpose. You've been scheming since day one." I picked up the phone from the counter and held it out to Officer Miller. "There's something else you should see." It was a recording of her admitting to selling my husband's jacket and other items online. Her voice was clear as day. The officer listened, sighed, and said quietly, "I think we're done here." As they packed, Mrs. Flores came over from next door, holding her phone, the same one she'd used to film that day in the yard. She handed it to the officer. "There's something else you might want to see," she said softly. He watched for a moment and nodded. "I see what's been going on. Thank you, ma'am." Sabrina's eyes flashed pure fury. "You had your little fan club help you. Congratulations. Enjoy your empty house." I stood still as she stomped out, dragging her suitcase across the floor. Liam followed behind her, his head low. At the door, he paused. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stopped her. I didn't touch him. Didn't scold him. Just said quietly, 'It's not too late to do better, son.'" The door closed behind them, and the house fell silent. For a long while, I stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the gentle creak of the old floorboards. Peace, real peace, is never loud. It slips in quietly when the noise finally leaves. The next few days moved slowly. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Mrs. Flores told me the story had made it onto a local news blog. The comments were endless. People wrote about standing up for themselves, about family disrespect, about karma. I didn't read all of it. I didn't need to. Liam came by a week later. He looked tired but lighter somehow. "I'm staying at a friend's for now," he said. "I'm filing for divorce." I nodded. "I'm proud of you." He smiled weakly. "You're not mad at me." I was, I admitted. "But holding anger is like keeping old clothes that don't fit anymore. At some point, you have to let them go." He laughed quietly and hugged me before leaving. After that, the house began to breathe again. Sunlight reached the corners it hadn't touched in months. I cleaned the kitchen, polished the floors, and opened every window. It smelled like lavender and freedom. Helen and a few women from church came by that weekend, bringing muffins and too many hugs. We sat at the kitchen table, laughing like teenagers. Helen said, "You should teach sewing again. You have the patience of a saint and the hands of a miracle worker." I smiled. "Maybe I will." A few weeks later, I opened a small class in the church basement called Threads of Dignity. The women came with ripped blouses, torn skirts, and stories heavier than any fabric. We sewed. We cried. We laughed. It felt good to make something whole again, even if it was just cloth. One Sunday, while tidying up after class, I found the old red sweater that had been thrown into the yard that day. A little faded now, one sleeve torn, but still soft. I took it home, sat by the window, and started mending it, stitch by stitch, slow and steady, until the hole disappeared into the pattern. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I set down the needle and looked at my hands. They were older, wrinkled, but strong. Everything I had repaired in that sweater was something I had also repaired inside myself. People think revenge is about making someone else hurt, but the truth is, it's about remembering your worth. I glanced out the window. The garden was blooming again, lilies and marigolds swaying in the wind. Life always comes back when you stop letting people trample it. If you've ever been made to feel small, if someone's told you that what you love is worthless, I hope you remember this. You can always rebuild. You can always reclaim the space that's yours. And most of all, remember what I learned the hard way. Respect never goes out of style.